Okay, and we're live. Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Sorry we're a little bit behind. Technical difficulties, of course. But delighted to be joined by Chris today. Thanks so much for joining us.
Appreciate it, Tomas. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no, I suppose there's been a lot of interest actually in the auto industry, and I saw a couple of your posts in other groups, and I suppose it tweaked my interest, and I was interested. So maybe give everybody a little bit of background information on yourself, your business, and what you do.
Sure. My name is Chris Wasepka. I've got KW Photo Data. I've been doing this for about 2 years now. I just kind of stumbled into the niche, really, of the auto industry. I was looking at, while I was doing real estate, I was just kind of looking at um, the turnover of houses, and how many were on the market and how quickly they sold, and things like that. Now I'm in a smaller market. Dickinson, North Dakota is only a population of a little under 20,000 people, so not a major metropolitan area by any stretch. I just came across, while I was in the market for a new vehicle, I was looking at online, their presentation, and just kind of the bad photos, bad lighting taken with a cell phone, that type of scenario. And I just happened to kind of think, wow, there's a lot of things I think that Matterport could probably do just with the photo version alone. So I started kind of doing a little research and seeing what I could do. And I ended up hitting up our local GM dealership, Sachs Motor Company, and just kind of showing them. I did a free demo on their car or in their showroom. It was kind of a dry run for me, so it was. I was kind of experimenting, but when I was able to turn out the photos and then show the virtual tour for their online, presence, and when they're dealing with people within about a 500-mile radius that don't want to drive to the dealership, they want to be able to walk through and look at that vehicle as best as they could. I really kind of piqued their attention. They gave me I think I started with 10 different vehicles. They were able to turn those vehicles a little quicker than normal. I signed a contract with them, and then I did that for about 20 months. And then this COVID kind of hit, and they were forced to kind of close things down, and they were trying to sell cars through a closed doors, and they had GM shut down production because they were making ventilators for COVID and a lot of different things. So it was kind of a perfect storm. It looks like things are going to kind of turn around here shortly. It sounds like the sales are going to start picking up, and I can get back to doing what I love to do. But it was just one of those things where I also took over their Facebook marketplace, managing their online content. And they used to get maybe one or two people a month that were kind of interested in finding their vehicles. And we ended up selling about an average of 8 units a month just through Facebook Marketplace, which was a huge turnaround for them. So, everybody seems to be on social media. A lot of people, especially with COVID, kind of learned how to shop online if they weren't doing it previously. So that turned out to be pretty beneficial for them as well. I had I guess it was really kind of an advantage. I was able to attend their morning sales meetings every morning at 8 o'clock. And I did that for about 1.5 years. I learned an incredible amount of the insides, the profit margins, the pain points, how these folks were selling. And that really proved to be valuable in putting together their presentation and getting everything on there. Because, predominantly what I'm doing for them is I'm selling their pre-owned, or I'm marketing their pre-owned vehicles. And anybody that may have a little bit of knowledge on the auto industry, generally there is an MSRP for their new vehicles. So there is no markup. The GMD or the GM auto industry sets the price on those vehicles, and there's maybe a few little promotional lower interest rates, something like that. But how they make their money is on the vehicles that are traded in. And the stuff coming in on the lot that's traded in, like 2015 Chevy Silverado traded in on a 2020 Silverado. And how the auto industry kind of works is that they have a floating loan on all of that pre-owned inventory. So if you can even turn that, which is generally on average about 3 weeks of being on the lot, if you can even turn that a couple of days faster than that 21 days, It's a huge difference at the end of the year for that loan, just for the interest payments alone. So they never knew what they were getting in. So it wasn't like there was a batch marketing material like the new stuff coming out of GM, and they have all the really nice videos and the nice things like that. But, you know, if you had a F-150, a Ford 2010 traded in on a new deal, they had no photos for it. If it was a stock photo, you know, placed in front of a mountainscape or something like that, but wasn't even the same color, wasn't the same pickup. Yeah. So I was able to grab these vehicles up, do the photos or do the scan in my studio, pull the photos and have everything placed onto their website the following morning. So it was about within, you know, 18 hours turnaround. They actually had fresh marketing. They used 14 different photos that they picked. I used them I placed them in the same order, and then I would share the tour on their Facebook Marketplace page.
Okay, and you were saying, so just take a step back so before you were working with them, what was like? Yeah, I know I've had, I suppose, a couple of encounters with auto dealers, and I suppose the first mistake I made was that I went in and I was looking at all the shiny new cars, and then I soon found out was that they have to use the marketing content provided to them by the manufacturers for new cars, so they can't actually create their own content for that a lot of times. So when you I suppose began working with them, what kind of content were they creating for were they outsourcing any of the content in terms of photography services for used vehicles, or what was the kind of the price point that you entered at, and what made sense for them on, say, a larger scale?
When I initially went in there, their salesmen were going out with their cell phones and taking kind of some random photos, and you know, sometimes the vehicle wasn't even clean. Yeah. It was bad lighting. They didn't light the interiors. They didn't. It was really pretty poor. Yeah. When I was pitching, now I went to the Ford dealership, the Toyota dealership, the Chevy dealership, and I kind of pitched all of them. And I really wasn't concerned with who I was going to represent, but they all kind of had the same problem. The Toyota dealership was paying a gentleman $50 a vehicle just to take photos with a DSLR. Yep. When I went into the Chevy dealership, they looked at it not only for the photos, but they saw the potential for the virtual tour, how they could share those with people that were inquiring about the vehicle online, like I said, within about a 500-mile radius, Billings, Montana, Minot, that type of stuff, so that these folks weren't having to drive and then showing up and being disappointed that the vehicle had rock chips or there was a rip in the seat or something like that. So they were getting a accurate representation of the vehicle, so that they were actually willing to get in their vehicle and drive to Dickinson and purchase that vehicle that they were looking online. Yeah. Now they were paying me $150 a unit. I was averaging between 3 and 4 a day. So I was anywhere between 70 and 100 when things were really kind of rocking and rolling. Yeah. If with that I was actually, they just gave me admin access to their website. So instead of giving them a zip drive or something like that, I was just actually taking the photos. It was a pretty easy. I was using CDK at the time. We ended up going with Dominion later. They kind of switched around, but I was just dropping and dragging those photos that I would take right onto their website, and it was loading, and then they were having everything done. They just would send me a text when a vehicle was out of their detail shop. I would come pick it up, scan it, process it, pull the photos, put them on their website, and then manage their Facebook page as well. So It was a flat $150 per unit.
Brilliant. And like, so when you were beginning out work with the dealership, like what were the steps involved in going from like I know what you're saying when it's it made sense for a dealership on a larger scale to pay you, say, a flat price per vehicle if they were doing it on scale. But what was the steps involved from you going from, say, a couple of scans at the start to getting to that, say, 100 scans a month? I suppose what barriers did you have to go through in order to be able to hit that?
You know, what I kind of found interesting initially, and I think I was probably, you know, a lot like you looked at it, I thought that they would want to showcase their new inventory. I didn't realize that the bread and butter of that dealership, they would have between about $150 and a $500 profit margin on that new vehicle is all. They would have between a $3,000 and a $4,000 markup on that used vehicle. So major markup on the pre-owned side, and they didn't have the photos for that. So I learned pretty quick by asking questions. I wanted to know where their difficulties were. As I went in and did my background and looked at their website. And if you go to your local dealership, and I encourage all of you to do that, pull up their website on their pre-owned vehicles, and you're going to find out probably about 40% of those vehicles do not have photos. And it's really hard to sell a 2012 F-150 when there isn't even a stock photo for that vehicle. So I went in and recognized pretty quickly and just started asking some questions why they didn't have those photos. Well, when that vehicle gets traded in, let's say they bring it in and they trade it in on a brand new pickup, they now have that used vehicle in their inventory. Well, it may need a windshield, it may need new tires, it may need an oil change, they may need to wait on the title to show up. There's a lot of variables there. So that's why the turnover was about 3 weeks before they may even get that thing back on the lot before they can even try to sell it. So what I kind of said to them is that I was able to take those photos and process them and have them in within 18 hours. Now, I started doing a pre-photo where I was just doing one single photo of the vehicle so that they had at least something stock while it was going through their detail shop, getting tires, getting a dent fixed, that type of stuff. They were finding that the interest on those vehicles now, because there was some representation online of at least that particular pickup instead of some stock photo from wherever they might have pulled it from. When I was meeting with those folks and kind of learning about, the difficulties they were having is they never knew what was coming in next. They never knew what was going to get traded in tomorrow. So that's why they didn't have any photos online, and they were trying to sell the car, take the photos, place everything online. They were giving it to their admin gal or a sales service department. I mean, they had lots of different people trying to do the job. It was never being done with any consistency. And I offered to manage all of that for them in that price of the 150 per unit. Okay. That took a lot of headache from them. They didn't have to worry about that anymore at all. And that was what kind of sold it for me with this dealership, is that I was going to take over that aspect of their pre-owned inventory, and I was going to showcase everything online for them. And it was going to be a turnkey operation.
Well, brilliant. Well, that's straight away, I suppose that stands out to me as one of the biggest benefits to them, and that kind of barrier from going from a couple of vehicles. Is this going to work? Is this a long-term solution to, okay, this makes their life a hell of a lot easier. And I saw it as one of the biggest headaches we've had. So you mentioned before that you were sitting in on their sales meetings, and I suppose that is, you can't get any more inside access to what they think of it and how their operation works than that. And how did that come about? Like, when did you go from going as, I suppose, the kind of the photographer guy to being part of their sales team in essence?
What I did is I offered. I basically said, the more I can learn about your business, the better I can help you guys sell your vehicles. And if I can kind of get the insides of how these things are, the trade-ins, the profit margins, the turnaround, the more educated I become on your product, the better I'm going to be able to showcase it. And they had no problem with me showing up. And it was incredibly beneficial to them and to me, because I could see what the customer was looking at on certain vehicles. If it was a diesel, where the wear and tear was. I was doing engine compartment photos, the whole nine. I was doing if there was any exhaust or any carbon on the exhaust. I mean, things like that. Somebody who would come and kick tires on the dealership would look at. I was showcasing that, even as simple as taking a very close up of the tires, so that this person was looking at, tires can run you anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 to put brand new rubber on these vehicles. Yeah. If they knew that these vehicles had really nice tires, they knew that wasn't going to have to be something they were going to have to invest in as well. So those little things like that, I learned what the customers were looking for. Was the vehicle a smoker? I mean, was there a smoker that owned the vehicle prior? Yeah. All of these things that photos didn't necessarily tell you, but I was putting in the description that there was a smoker. There is, they would bomb the cars, or they would call it bomb the cars, but it would try to disinfect the smell. Those type of things. The more information that I was able to give these folks that were shopping on their tablets and shopping on their phones, the more interest that they had and the more vehicles that they were able to sell because of that. I mean, it's an information-based world anymore. People are trying to be a little bit more knowledgeable about the product, and they can do so much from their couch. And that was my catchphrase was kick tires from the couch. You didn't have to go in. You didn't have to have a salesman looking over your shoulder. That they've got pretty bad reputations of the big bow ties and the, hey, how can I get you into this vehicle today? And, that kind of high pressure deal. A lot of those folks were able to, what they were finding is when somebody called and scheduled a test drive, it was because they already went through the virtual tour. They already saw all the photos, and they have basically decided this was the vehicle for them. Now they were going to come in and drive it around the block. Previously, they'd have to go in and then they'd have to deal with the salesman. And the salesman's number one job is to try to get you to sit down with them. And you can start talking about running your credit. And you can start talking about what kind of warranties and things like that. Well, most people just want to see if it's even something they'd be interested in going through that process for.
Yeah.
You could be sitting in a dealership for a couple of hours before you actually sign the paperwork and drive out with that vehicle. So if you were able to do a lot of that from your couch in your own time, if you've got kids, I do, takes a lot of time. So your free time to just blow on purchasing is difficult. So I wanted to present them an option that they could cross off a lot of those boxes before the people even showed up. And when they did show up, it was because they were buyers. They were interested in the vehicle, and you had a really good potential of selling that vehicle to them.
Yeah, that's a very important fact that you're mentioning, is that like one of the big uses for, I suppose, virtual experiences and immersive media solutions in a lot of industries is, first of all, it's to shorten the sales process. It's to bring people from seeing photos that they don't really know what it looks like. They don't really see the real kind of finer details that they would in person, to kind of bridge that gap, to move them further along the process. So when they actually arrive at the likes of a dealership, it's to ask specific questions that they have about the vehicle. They're not there to form their first opinion or their first impression of it, or have a look under the bonnet or a look underneath it to see all these areas that they couldn't see on photos. It's to move them through that process a lot quicker. And I love what you said there, actually, was that in those meetings you found out some areas of that that are very important to people. Like I suppose in Ireland there'll be no set of tires cost 2,000, I tell you that, because our vehicles are quite small. But I know in the States the vehicles are much bigger, the tires are much bigger, and it's a much bigger cost that has to be factored into it. So stuff like that, the things like that would then obviously affect your scanning process. I'm sure your scanning process got a lot better and a lot more specific to what you knew the customers were looking for after sitting in on those meetings as well. Is that be correct?
Absolutely. Yep. It actually changed the process of how I worked my way around the car. I would do you've got about an 18-inch window there, that anything closer than 18 inches with the Matterport camera, things get a little distorted and you get those little lines don't mesh up. So I would get about between 18 inches and 2 feet away from that vehicle. I would lower my tripod down so that the scan was just going to be of that front tire and that rear tire. And then I would add that to the photos. And it became so effective that the detail shop began sending me the vehicles, and they were armor-alling just the front. They were cleaning that front tire and making it shiny, the front and the rear tire, just on the driver's side, because those are the only ones that I was showcasing. Yeah. And the customer was able to see, because Matterport was so effective, you could actually see the little nubs on the tires if they were still new, the little rubber extensions that you see before they drive off. And those were things that were selling points, because they were able to see that this vehicle had new tires. This vehicle didn't have any kick up. We have a lot of dirt roads in Dickinson, North Dakota. It's oil field country. It's agriculture country. Yeah. So a lot of people driving. Normally on a bad cell phone picture, you don't see any of that. Matterport is pretty detailed, so you can even see if there's any rock chips, any of that type of stuff. And what Sachs found so important is that they were representing the vehicle as it actually was. They weren't getting customers showing up and saying, wow, this doesn't look like anything of what you represented. The photos were weren't very good. I'm here, I'm disappointed. They were getting people that were coming in and seeing that if there was even a little dent on the fender, that showed up on the Matterport scan and on the photos. So they didn't feel like they were getting swindled. At least they were being honest. It's a used vehicle. They're not trying to sell it up and pretend that it's a Lamborghini when it's a Ford Escort. So it was one of those deals that they found the honest approach of showing even, all warts included, that it was a better sales pitch for them because they weren't trying to, hide behind something that it wasn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, I saw like I had a look at a couple of tours that you've done, and they're very impressive. But what was really impressive was kind of the layout that you had the vehicles nearly in an X shape for some of the examples that you had done. Like was that a facility that was provided by the GM that they did all their photo shoots already in? And how would, say, somebody want to enter the auto industry get around that if there wasn't somewhere like that suitable to shoot?
That was one of the selling points that I had with Saks. I actually leased that space.
Okay.
It was kind of a gamble.
Yeah.
I brought I saw it was about a block from the dealership, so I was able to walk down and back and forth if I needed to. Generally, what I would do is I'd get that first vehicle, I would go up and scan it into my space, and then I would drive it down and just exchange it for another vehicle that they had ready to go. That was kind of a challenge, and that's going to be something that I guess people that are looking for doing this on their own, if you can find something, a space that's close, otherwise you're going to be reliant on the dealership. And what I did find when I was pitching the Toyota dealership and the Ford dealership is that they were thinking of doing it on the showroom floor, but it was going to have to be after hours because with Matterport especially, you're going to have alignment issues if you've got salesmen walking around and people coming in and out of the doors. And what made it such an ideal situation for the GM dealership is that I made it absolutely pain-free for them. I didn't make it any more work. It wasn't difficult. If they were trying to work around a camera and a scanner all day, it was going to be more difficult. And it looked like a headache for them. And that really is where I saw the problem. And that's why I leased that space so close, because I knew that was going to make it really attractive for them, because at that point I was going to take the vehicle off site. I was going to go up into my controlled environment. I was going to be able to scan it, do what I needed to do, set up my lights, all of that type of stuff. And I wasn't going to interfere with their salesman on the floor at all. Now, generally, what I have found, and when I've sold this service to this training to some other people around the country and shoot even across the world, there's a lot of dealerships that actually have a designated spot where they're taking photos. And it's sometimes not as big as you need to be. So you kind of have to work around that. I've found that you needed about 8 feet around the vehicle so that you could get that big, nice broad shot, and you can get the corner shots and things like that. But if you can just kind of, if they have a space like that, then you're in good shape. Otherwise, there's going to be a little bit of a challenge on either doing it after hours where they bring in the 3 or 4 vehicles that they have on the lot that day that need to be done. You get in and out. It was taking me about 40 to 45 minutes per unit after I kind of knew what I was doing. So you could turn those pretty quickly. You could do 3 or 4 in under, around 3 hours. So it wasn't very challenging. But if you can find your own space and then you can market it, I used a lot of Chevy tailgates, things like that. I tried to make it kind of a fun place. Instead of just going to a car lot, you went into a really kind of a cool environment. When you were doing your virtual tour, it just looked neat, and it drew a lot of people in that were in the market for shopping. And what I was finding is that every dealership basically has the same stuff on the lot. Even the Toyota dealership has a lot of Fords and a lot of Chevys and a lot of GM vehicles, but because it determines on what comes in off the floor. What I was finding and what I kind of, my pitch to Saks is that you're going to be the first place that they come and look at for their used vehicle. And if you can make them first, your chances of making a sale increase dramatically. If you're in difference, you're the 4th person that they visit. At that point, they might have already found something. And that was proving to be accurate because the presentation was so much better.
Yeah, that's another important point. Is that it's funny, like a lot of times in some industries, some businesses don't want to be the first ones to introduce working for other businesses, but then there is a big advantage for a business like an auto dealers in a region of being the first people to introduce the likes of these kind of virtual experiences to the market, to draw in new customers and trying to get ahead of the competition in terms of that. And is that one thing that like did did they utilize that in terms of their own PR as well? Was that something that they found like very beneficial in terms of, I suppose, creating a bit of noise around their business as well?
They did. They actually, I produced a couple of small like screen capture videos for them, and they actually did some. They do a lot. GM gives them a certain marketing allotment so that they can do radio ads, local radio, local TV, whatever, and a lot of that is canned and pre-made for them. But they have a little bit of wiggle room on if they've got a president sale going or they have something like that. I actually produced some of that stuff, and they were advertising on their television, on the local channels and whatever, that they had a virtual tour. So you were able to look at this unit without having to leave your house. And they got a lot of really good feedback because of that. Nobody wants to go in and deal with a car dealer. That it's just the car salesman has got, they've got kind of a funky reputation, and it's always, it's kind of a joke, but it's one of those things where people don't want to go in and deal with that if they don't have to. So they promoted that, and it worked really well for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's an interesting one. In terms of like you use Matterport for this. Like I suppose like the one thing that jumps to mind is like Matterport is like, of course, like the dollhouse. I remember when I did my first vehicle a couple of years ago with Matterport, and I saw the dollhouse of the vehicle after. I was like, whoa, it's like a 3D toy car. Like, it came out very well. So So I suppose, what were the challenges in trying to, like, do you try and how clean of a dollhouse can you get of the vehicle when you're trying to create that? And what do you try and do differently? Scan at different heights, scan the doors open. What do you try and do to, I suppose, capture every kind of element of the car, but also getting the perfect scan as well?
Yep. And the dollhouse was always kind of a challenge, really. And I've got a extended, so I would take, I would get the visual height at about 5 feet when I was going around and doing the perimeter of the vehicle. But I had an extended tripod, and I would try to get up on top, and they had a couple of different benefits. It would clean up the dollhouse a little bit, and then it would also show if there was any hail damage. You're going to see that in my part of the country. We've got tornadoes, we've got hail, we've got that type of stuff. So if you could see the roof of the car and see if there were any little divots or anything like that, that was going to be something that anybody in this area was going to be looking for if the car had been through a storm, anything like that. So it was never a major selling point, though. It was never something that was a deal breaker. Mm-hmm. The dollhouse was just kind of a cool, kind of a wow factor for them. What really was the most effective for them, and no kidding, were the photos. Just the photos online. And then if they had somebody inquire, what happened with this dealership is the salesman would go on a rotation. So salesman A would have the people that walk in the door. Salesman B would have second up, is what they would call it. So if salesman A was busy with a customer and another somebody walked through the door, they would get that second up. And then a third salesman would be all of their online inquiries. Now GM gives them a budget, and they would advertise on Car Guru, and they would advertise on those type of sites where they would put their inventory out. So they would be answering phone calls, and they would be answering online inquiries. And that included kind of Facebook inquiries. And they were non-existent before I started doing this for them. But when they would have somebody from, within that 500-mile radius, because that was kind of their geofence, they knew that people were willing to travel that far for a vehicle. And really, somebody from Florida going to North Dakota to buy a pickup truck wasn't really going to happen very often. So they didn't push that very often. But when the salesman would get a internet inquiry, they were able to copy and paste that virtual tour and send that right off to them. So the person could go ahead and they could kind of wander around that car and look at it in detail. And that would give them a buying experience like nobody else was offering. And I think I was really fortunate that the general manager was really pretty forward thinking. He kind of saw that technology was going to play a part. And he also sees, vehicles like Carvana and whatever, which are literally, you can buy this vehicle online. They're going to show up with a flatbed truck, and they're going to drop it off in your driveway. So if you weren't able to compete with those type of services, you weren't going to be around very long. So he understood the technology was going to play a big aspect, and he recognized that people do a lot of shopping from their phone. Amazon introduced us to that. The the buy now, click, have it delivered on your doorstep the following day. People get really used to that convenience. And if they can shop that way for cars, it was going to increase their volume, and it did.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's like buying a vehicle is probably the second most expensive purchase you ever have after a house. So if you're like I suppose virtual tours became big in the real estate sector because of the value of what you were dealing with. Paying a couple of hundred for good marketing to actually shorten the sales process and get a house sold or win a listing made sense. Same way with vehicles. If people want to buy a car, they want to buy a car, and they either want to buy it from your dealership or they want to buy it from another dealership. If you want to be the dealership that they buy it from, you need to come up with new innovative ways to win customers, or else you're going to just stay where you are and be constantly in that kind of cycle of competing. So another question I had was actually on Matterport. So what, like, do you continue to use Matterport because Matterport is what you've used forever, or did you use that for a specific reason, or did you look at using other, say, platforms instead of Matterport?
You know, I did, and originally when I started doing this, they didn't offer the new plans. I have a classic plan, and then I ended up purchasing a new plan. The new plans work great because you're able to scan that vehicle, and then the turnover rate on that is about 3 weeks. So I would just archive that as soon as I would find out that vehicle was sold. So I was in these sales meetings every morning. I knew which units were that had moved off the lot. I would make my markings on, they actually gave me a sheet, and I would circle which unit it sold. And then I would go back up into my studio and I would archive that so that I wasn't paying for any space. I had the 50 unit, the live unit, or still do. I have the 50 unit plan so that I only pay for that. I've got close to 600 archived vehicles that are on that plan that have sold. So that worked really well. And when I was having to pay for the $20 processing fee to upload every one of those vehicles, that kind of bit into my profit a little bit. And that's when I started looking at some of the other options. But what really, they wanted that virtual tour. They wanted it for their online sales because they knew that that's where the future of their sales were going to be. They're always going to have people walking in the dealership, but that is not how the future, the millennials are shopping. They want to do everything online. They don't want to, if they don't have to talk to anybody in person, they won't. And that's what they were kind of finding. So the other side of that was really important with Matterport, I kind of want to touch on, especially if you're pitching your own dealer, is that vehicle sales are emotional. People identify themselves with the vehicle that they're in. So if they're a truck guy, they want a nice truck. Or if they're it's one of those, it goes back in the States, especially, it goes back to, it was always the coolest guy always had the fastest horse. I mean, that was just kind of how they identified themselves, and the freedom. We've got a lot of highway to drive in this part of the world, and it's something that people, when they purchase a vehicle, it's an emotional purchase, and sometimes you can get them. They may be looking at X vehicle, and the payment is $300 a month, but if you can show them Y vehicle, and the payment is $340 a month, but it's got a better paint job or a better motor package or a better trim package, leather interior, all that good stuff. They all of a sudden will quickly bump their budget to that $340 a month payment because they just see it. They can see themselves in it. They can see themselves driving it, and they can see their friends saying, "Wow, that is a nice pickup." That's one of the things that, if you can go in and you have that knowledge that photography, especially if the lighting is right, plays on emotions. It just draws you into that. And if you have something that isn't just a flat photo, that bad lighting and blurry iPhone camera or whatever it might be, you're missing out on a lot of sales. But if you can have a really clean, well-lit presentation that plays on their emotions, and it just, all of a sudden they see themselves in the driver's seat and they want to have that vehicle. So, I mean, it was really beneficial. And when I kind of learned that, the emotional aspect of the purchase of a vehicle, that played huge on selling for them. So, I mean, when you're going in, hit on those key points of the pain points of not having the vehicles photos online quick enough on their website quick enough, and the emotional aspect, because they're going to recognize that you all of a sudden know what you're talking about because they understand that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and that emotional aspect of it was something that I would have seen through the photos as well, and the use of like how would you kind of play in those emotions with use of say the matter tags and the use of that kind of would you put say like some of the other say marketing material that might have been developed around those vehicles in that. I saw actually which is very impressive. I saw that when you were scanning inside the vehicle, you used to turn on the vehicle, so all the inside dashboard lights and all came on as well to kind of make that kind of even feel like you're there even a little bit more.
Yep, that's exactly right. And they wanted that from the get go. They wanted to show that there was a backup camera. They wanted to show if there's navigation. They wanted to show all of those things so that somebody could find that out and they could get that information on their own. But that was one of the scans that I would do. I would do a scan in the middle of the back seat, and then I would do a scan in the middle of the console. So I only had to do scans in two scans in the interior of the vehicle, and then I was able to pull. They wanted a photo of the steering wheel because it showed if there was cruise control, if there was hands-free Bluetooth, that type of stuff. And they wanted a scan of the complete front of the vehicle with the seats, if there was upgraded leather seats with custom stitching, that type of things, with the head badge, all of that type of stuff in there. And then I would do a photo of the back seat. So I was able to just jump in and then use Matterport to pull all of those photos. So I wasn't having to run two cameras. I was able to get the tour and the photos from a simple scan, averaging about 18 scans per vehicle. Like I said, between 40-45 minutes. And that was with moving the lighting. I would put lights underneath both seats, front seats, lights between both back seats. And then I would have a smaller light on a tripod that I would actually put beneath the camera. And you would never see the actual lights per se, but you would see the shadows that were cast. And you would see if it had WeatherTech floor mats, if it had those type of upgrades, you could easily identify those. And then, like I said, lighting, the background that I learned on photography is lighting plays a huge role in drawing in and playing off emotion. And auto sales is such an emotional purchase that the more you could light things up like that, the more attractive it looked. I had one of the dealers say, you're able to make a used vehicle look like a Lamborghini. It just looks clean. It looks fast. It looks like what these people want to see instead of just a flat outdoor bad lighting scenario. So that was a huge compliment, and they recognized it as the sales and their online sales picked up.
Okay, yeah, geez, you can't get a much better compliment than that anyway. In
No.
in terms of the just the shooting inside, just I know from my own experience, is like what are the issues that people should watch out for in terms of misalignment? Do you switch from say the bigger Pro 2 camera to a smaller camera like the Z1 for the inside shoots, or do you just say maybe check the level or the stabilization before you scan, or do you do multiple scans in case there is some errors, or what way do you combat that?
I did mess around. I've got an Insta360 and I did mess around with using the smaller camera on the interior, thinking that it was going to help.
Yeah.
But the
quality
it just wasn't as detailed. I mean, there's a big difference between that Insta and that Pro 2 that I use.
Yeah.
The detail and the clarity and all that. So I would use the biggest deal was keeping that camera level and keeping that camera stable. Now I kind of learned I would just use it was actually recommended from Matterport when I purchased it. Was an SLK tripod, and then I had modified it just in a little where I would pull the extender out, and then I was able to when I was doing the back seat, you would notice that there are actually holes where the seat belts are. So I would actually put the tripod legs down into those holes.
Okay.
And you would kind of play with it, and then I have just a small level that I would put on top. And as long as that camera was level and stable, you really limited those misalignments. And you had to try to stay away from the 18 inches. So I would bring that as far as I could to the back seat, where you recline against the back part of the seat. I would try to keep that camera as close to that as possible, so you didn't have any wonky lines off the headrest from the front seats.
Yep.
And then I would have the two back legs of the tripod in those actual seat belt where those holes are. And then I would have one leg on the floorboard. And it worked out really well where you didn't ever, even if you looked around and you spun around and you were looking, you didn't rarely even see the legs of those tripods. So they didn't interfere with that at all. And then when I would jump to the front console, I would have the front leg, I'd have both back legs coming onto the floorboard of the back seat, and the front leg going on the console itself. And it was the same type of deal. That there was enough stability there that I didn't have any issues. Now, if you were spinning around in the virtual tour, you were going to see some misalignments on the headrests and whatever from the front seats, because there wasn't much you could do about that.
Yeah, just some close.
But the front photos that I would take, there wouldn't be any misalignments at all. And what I see people having some difficulty doing, because there are, a lot of people are doing it or have seen kind of what I've been doing and are trying to do it as well. They're trying to take a photo from the front seat, and you would always have some wonky stuff going on the steering wheel. I mean, just absolutely look just goofy. No alignment on the steering wheel. Myself. Yeah. So if you got that center console about even with the headrests, you were far enough distance away from that steering wheel that you didn't have any of those misalignments. Yeah. And when you're pulling those photos, you can always zoom in. So you could still get that great photo of the steering wheel with all the options that are on it, cruise control, hands-free, all of that good stuff, without having any misalignments. And you didn't necessarily need to have that view from the passenger seat per se, because you had the same feel from the middle console.
Okay, I get you. And in terms of the misalignments outside the vehicle, like when you were, like, I know that you do it from, you do a sweep of the vehicle with all the doors closed, and then you might do with all the doors open and boot open, bonnet open. Was there any ever misalignments, or what do you need to look out for in that, in terms of like, does it kind of, like, you know what I mean, kind of skew the transitions, or does it misalign it sometimes, or what difficulties should people look out for when it comes to that?
What I learned, and I don't know why this is, but what I learned is, as long as you change the elevation. So as I would do the full exterior scan. So I would do one in the center of the vehicle, one on each back corner, one from the back where the trunk is, or the boot, I suppose you guys call it. Yeah. So I would do my exterior scans first, and then I would open everything up. I'd open all the doors. I'd open up the hood. I'd open up the trunk. And then I would bring my Matterport camera back about 4 feet behind my initial scan, where my initial broadside scan profile of that vehicle. And I would raise the elevation of that up about 2 feet. Okay. And for whatever reason, when I raised the elevation, it would trick that software, and it did away with any alignment issues. And once it took that first scan of the doors open, then I would go get the scan of inside the driver's door, inside the passenger door, inside the trunk, passenger door, passenger back seat door, passenger front seat door, and then I would elevate the shot of underneath the hood so that you could see down, and you could see if there was any grease buildup. You could see if the belts were wore. You could see all of that. And it became so much that they were so effective. They were actually having the detailers detail underneath the hood and wipe down the top of the motor and do all of that type of stuff, because it's something that people look at. They can tell if the vehicle was maintained. If it was dusty and there was grease and it was crud and oil, they knew that the prior owner didn't take care of it. But as long as I went in that process, I never had any problems transitioning from the doors closed to the doors open. If you didn't change the elevation, you would run into alignment issues, just like being in a home and trying to get into a room where the door was closed because you forgot to open it. And then you open up the door real quick, and the 3 previous scans didn't recognize that the doors were open, and now it's saying no alignment. Just changing that elevation seemed to solve that. And it was by chance that I kind of came across that. I was just experimenting how I could do it. And I knew it was going to be a deal breaker if I had to do it in 2 different scans. Yep. And for whatever reason, that solved that problem, just kind of tricking the camera with a different elevation.
Okay. Yeah. Geez, it's funny. You learn the tricks. A lot of this is trial and error process, isn't it? You need to be able to do multiple ones to find out what works best, find out what doesn't work and what you shouldn't be doing. In terms of like, was it mostly, say, single vehicle scans that you would do, or would you do multiple vehicle scans, or what use would the dealers have for, say, both of those tours?
Great question. So I was initially doing as many vehicles as I could because I was paying $20 for the processing. So I wanted to get as many vehicles in that scan as possible so that I didn't, I didn't have any costs going out. Now, what we found was really effective on that end is that if I would try to keep like vehicles together. So if it was two-wheel drive pickups or it was four-wheel drive pickups, I would try to keep them around, because what would happen is if you had somebody who had a $15,000, $20,000 budget, they were looking at vehicles in that. Well, if they were looking at this Chevy over here, this 2012, and in the same scan was this 2014 with all of these upgrades, well, they're there anyhow. So they'd be wandering around looking at the vehicle they might be looking at the whole time. They knew that they just had to press the button. They could go look at this pickup too. So they were getting a lot of upsales that way. That was pretty effective.
That's
because you're able, the more inventory you're able to show, the more likely you're going to be able to sell it. When I switched to the plan where I was able to archive, I was doing a lot more 1 and 2 at a time, just because it was vehicle. There wasn't any distraction of any other vehicles around there, because sometimes it didn't make much sense to do a Ford Escort and a Chevy Silverado in the same scan. They're completely different vehicles. One's a little compact, the other's a big ranch truck. That you weren't going to get any sales from that to happen. But if you didn't have any distraction, it was vehicles specific, then they were able to look at the vehicle they wanted. I didn't have to pay the processing fees, so I didn't have any problem doing that one at a time. But if you were looking at it on that way, that's a pretty good selling point, that if you're trying to get somebody, you're trying to upsell somebody from a vehicle at just $50 more a month on their payment to be able to do both vehicles at the same time, or 3 or 4 vehicles at the same time, that increased the more inventory that they were able to look at. So it helped them.
And that'll be very relevant for anybody looking to get into this industry, especially when you're approaching a dealership for the first time, is they have all of these used vehicles that have no scans of them. I understand after a while, once you've done so many in that position, like the opportunities of scanning so many vehicles side by side gets less and less, because you have most of the vehicles already scanned. New inventory comes in week to week. You don't know what's coming in. But when you approach a dealership from the beginning, they have all of this. I suppose a lot more of those opportunities present themselves. Is that what you found after a while? The kind of opportunities for that kind of gets less and less as you build a relationship.
Yep, absolutely. And the way it kind of worked is that I could have waited, and I could have waited for 3 or 4 vehicles or 6 vehicles to get on the lot. But because I purchased that new plan, as a vehicle came on, I would just grab that one up. And I averaged between 3 and 4 a day. Some days I would have 6. Some days I wouldn't have any at all. It just depended on what they had sold the prior day and what had cleared the title process and what was ready from the detail shop and all of that type of stuff. So it wasn't a perfect science, but I was able to take care of what was there on their lot and get that on their website. And the big deal for the dealership, and something you need to think about when you're pitching them, they have a floating loan on that inventory. The quicker they turn that inventory, the more profit it is at the end of the year. And that is a big deal. If they're averaging 21 days, if you could just knock that down to 18 days per unit. Now, if they're doing 100 units a month, like my dealership was, that's 12. What is that? 1,200 a month, 1,200 vehicles a year. So, or 12. Yeah. Right. My math wrong. Yeah. So anyhow, that floating loan, that interest that's being paid on that floating loan is decreased dramatically if they can just turn that even a couple of days quicker. That's a selling point. If you're doing that, give them that thought, put that in their head that the time on lot is going to decrease because you're able to put those photos online quicker. You can get that stuff marketed quicker. You can get it sold quicker. Therefore, it's not they're not paying interest on that as much.
Yeah, that's a very good point. It's funny. You must be the only person delighted with the new Matterport pricing model.
Oh, I was pleased. Everyone else is complaining. I was like, I couldn't ask for a better.
Well, I didn't know.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's funny hearing it. You're the first person I've heard it from where it's a business model is actually that very much suits this industry. So anybody that is on the call and using Matterport, you have an advantage that most other people wouldn't have. For most other industries, so that's quite good. So what would you say to somebody trying to enter this industry? Like, what would be, I suppose, a couple of main things that you can really only learn through experience, that they don't kind of rule themselves out of winning a client because they do some of the kind of the juvenile or the mistakes that you wouldn't know going into a meeting for the first time?
Well, one of the benefits of doing cars is that it started being such a routine that I could almost, if I fell out of order, I knew that I did. It was almost like, whoa, I shouldn't be here right now.
Yeah.
You were able to get that and streamline that process, that you were able to get around that vehicle in and out. You know, I would wipe everything down. I had a little a nice soft rag squeegee, and I wanted that thing to look better than it was ever going to look again from that point. I wanted it to look like candy, right? I mean, I wanted people just to see that and be like, wow, that is a sharp looking used vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
The vehicles didn't complain. I didn't have realtors that were saying, you know, this, I would like a different view here, or the lighting wasn't right or whatever. I mean, I was turning those things so quick that they were so happy with it. It was such an easy experience, right? It wasn't, it was like second nature. I think that what they need to look at on this end is that, and first and foremost, go into their local dealerships' web pages and look at their pre-owned inventory and look at how many vehicles do not have photos. The reason they don't have photos is somebody hasn't gone out there with a bad cell phone and taken them. Yeah. If they do have photos, look at the quality of them, the inconsistencies, just even where the photo was taken. Sometimes the dealership tries to keep them all in one location, maybe on their little showroom floor. Sometimes they're taking them on the lot. There may still be, you know, in my part of the country, a lot of snow, a lot of ice. There may be slush washed up on the side of the vehicle. I mean, it just looks dirty, and you're not going to sell anything that way. If you were just to say that I'm going to produce a product for you that is going to make this vehicle look like the best it will ever look from this point moving forward, I'm going to make sure that the slush, the bugs, the whatever aren't part of the scan. If you could work with them, most of them have a detail shop in-house because they have to detail all those vehicles that come in that are traded in. You're not going to sell something. Some of them are filthy when they get traded in. If you tell them that you will scan or you will take photos of that vehicle as soon as it's out of the detail shop, they're going to love that, because there's even going to be grime and stuff that builds up on the lot just from the wind, the dust, the rain, all of that. So if you told them, I'm going to make sure that this vehicle is presented as good as it's ever going to look, and you're going to have marketing for that vehicle the following day, they're going to kind of shake their head and wonder how you're going to do that. As soon as they figure out that you can, they're going to love you. They recognize the power of that online presence.
Yeah, absolutely, and the power of the quick turnaround time, as you said. That, like, if you can deliver a great service and in the shortest time possible, like that very much is suited for a company that turns over stock quickly. In certain cases, it could be a couple of days, so like something where you can have that kind of quick process is very much beneficial to everybody involved in that.
That's right, and remember, I think it's pretty close to industry wide. And I've talked to other dealers and whatever. You're looking at, on that pre-owned vehicle, they're looking at a $3,000 to $4,000 markup. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be 100% profit. They have to get the vehicle detailed. That usually is about a $300 bill. They may have to replace a windshield. They may have to put some tires on. They may have to do some stuff. Yeah. But their average is going to be between about $1,500 and $1,800 per unit profit. So $100, $150 is not a major expense for that vehicle if they're turning those quicker than they would normally. That washes out as quick, very simple in that turnover if it's increased. And they know that. And if you go in there kind of knowing the numbers, knowing the pain points, knowing if you look at their pre-owned inventory on their website and half of those vehicles don't have photos, they're not going to sell those vehicles on the description. Nobody's going to read a description of miles, and that's going to be the determining factor. They want to see a photo. They want to see the interior. Is the seats worn? What are the options on the interior? Some people are visual learners, visual shoppers. They want to see that. And if you don't have a photo, you're not going to sell it that way. So then you're expecting them to come into the dealership. Like I said, car dealers have a reputation for not necessarily being the funnest to be around. They're high pressure salesmen. If you can limit the possibility of them coming in and feeling pressure. Nobody wants to feel pressure. They want to feel like they're getting an honest, square deal. If you can give them all of the information before they show up to the dealership, they're coming in to look at that vehicle because they want to drive it. If there aren't any clicks, there aren't any, they don't have any issues with the transmission, not shifting correctly, anything like that. They've already decided in their mind that they want to buy that vehicle. Mm-hmm. So that if you've got, at that point, how to have somebody driving onto your lot as a buyer and not somebody that's just looking to shop. They're looking to buy that vehicle. Yeah. That's a huge advantage for those salesmen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose one thing that pops into mind there is like how are you able to show, like you remember saying, how are you able to show kind of the return on investment that they were getting? How are you able to show that, okay, before this is how long, this is the process, and now we've a much better selling process, quicker selling process, and this is the return on investment we're after getting as a result of investing in this technology. How did you kind of go about that process?
It was a theory. It was honestly, as I started, it was a theory. I said, your guys' photos online are terrible. I wouldn't come in here and buy one of these vehicles off of that photo. Let me see what we can do. Let's start charting this stuff. And it took about 6 months for me to put together that data and figure out what I was working with the sales manager. I was asking them, what's your average? I was starting to chart this unit 3416 sold in 2 weeks. I know their average is 3 weeks. That's a week difference. That's a big deal. I was charting and I was keeping all of that data because it was making my ability to go into those sales meetings. Mm-hmm. It was showing the value that I had, and they were happy when I was doing that for them. And they were sad that they had to let me go. They just couldn't afford it. They just didn't have the new vehicles on the lot to sell, which means I didn't have the old vehicles on the lot to sell. Yeah. I had some overhead for my studio, so if they weren't able to give me a certain amount, I wasn't able to pay my bills either. So we had to kind of separate that. I'm hoping that's going to turn around shortly. But if you went in with that saying, I have knowledge that this is going to increase your turnover, you tell them why it's going to increase their turnover, you're speaking their language, they're going to know that you've got some inside knowledge on what the car dealer or auto industry is like, and they're going to give you a shot. If you just said, give me a month, give me 50 vehicles on this month. Let's chart them together. Let's see how much faster these vehicles move off of your lot than they would have normally. Yeah. They know, especially the big, what I was impressed with GM is they crunch every number. They follow every sale. They follow every online sale. They follow all of their Facebook sales. It is a big deal. They understand the value of data. And when I was able to improve and increase those, that turnover time and drop that turnover time, they recognized that. They recognized that very quickly, and they saw the value in it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very important. We should all know our numbers, because at the end of the day, numbers don't lie. And if it comes down to a matter of whether they need to keep you on or not, like the numbers will be the determining factor, and that's very important. So actually, I just had a couple of people had a couple of questions actually, Chris. Might just bounce them off you. Actually, some people are asking, would you mind sharing some examples in the group later? I might get you to send some on to me and I'll post them up so people can see exactly, I suppose, your scanning technique, first of all, also the setup that you used for that kind of a warehouse that you rented, the lighting that you would have provided. That's brilliant. That's actually a good way for people to be able to see exactly what is involved in that. Another question here was, did the dealers always have vehicles in separate areas for you to scan? That was Bobby. So I can answer that. He actually rented out a warehouse for that beside the dealerships. Is that correct, to do those scans?
Yep. And I can absolutely share some scans with you. I'll make sure that you get all that stuff, Tomas, and you can share that with the group. All of the lighting, all of that type of stuff will be showcased in that. So
brilliant.
I'll go ahead. I'll put that all together for you and get that information so that you can share it. That the struggle is going to be, I think, is convincing the dealer. If you can find a space, it could be a storage unit. It could be something where that's close enough to that dealer that you can shuttle those vehicles back and forth. If you can do that for them, you're going to be in the door, because they're going to see the fact that they don't have to do anything. They would send me a text when a vehicle got back from their detail shop because it was clean. Everything was ready to go. I would go pick that up. I'd take it into my studio. I'd scan it and I'd drop it back on the lot. So I would only have that vehicle for, 45 minutes or an hour, and it would be right back on the lot. And then I would process all those photos and then put them on their website for them. So they didn't have to do anything but send me a text. That was such a headache saver for them, a time saver for them. The sales manager was just delighted because he was trying to get salesmen to do that job. Well, they're not getting paid to do that. They're working on commission. They don't want to go out there and take photos of that vehicle. And it was just, if you've ever been around sales, or I learned in those meetings that those car salesmen were a lot like
they're animals.
There was a lot of complaining going on. There was a lot of griping. There was a lot of, it was just kind of part of it. And I would just kind of sit back and chuckle and think, it is what it is. If they could keep that morale higher, because, in sales, you're going to hear 9 no's before you hear 1 yes. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of it can be demoralizing. So if you could do anything to help those salesmen sell more vehicles without them having to do things that they didn't want to have to do. In Dickinson, for instance, they would have to go out, and every time it snowed, they would have to go out and scrape all the snow off of all the vehicles. Well, they weren't getting paid for that. Yeah. But they weren't going to sell that vehicle either if you couldn't look in the windows. Mm-hmm. That was another benefit of what I was doing, because that vehicle might show up from the detail shop. I would take photos. We would get 2.5 feet of snow that night. That vehicle would be buried in snow. All the windows would be frosted over. Joe, a customer who would come in after hours and just drive through the lot and look at the vehicles, couldn't even peer in the windows because everything would be frosted over. Mm-hmm. Now with those photos, not only could they peer through the vehicle or through windows, they could wander around it like it was, like it was a sunny day. That was a huge benefit. So if anybody in this chat right now, or anybody who's interested, deals with any inclement weather, that's going to be a huge break for them. The dealership knows that, they recognize that. And if you can keep those salesmen happy, that's going to show to the customers walking through the door. And, a happy salesman generally puts on a better presentation, and they sell more vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very true. We just had another question in there. So they were asking, how did you come about the figure of, say, 150 per vehicle? Was that something that, I suppose, at the beginning you were looking at kind of a long-term thing, so you started small and you stuck to that figure? So as in whether you're doing 1 or whether you arrived at 100, you're going to be happy with that price?
Yeah, it was really pretty funny. I was trying to kind of number everything out. I didn't know what my average was going to be. Yeah. So I was just, it was kind of a ballpark. I was sitting with the GM. We were kind of discussing. I didn't know where the profit margins were. I had no idea. I was thinking that was going to be a lot of money. And I shot from the hip, and I said, well, I can do it for $150 a unit. And he said, okay. I could have possibly said $200 a unit, and he would have said, okay. I didn't know. And it was one of those things where I landed on it. It was enough for me to be able to, I was making pretty darn good money, and it was it was easy work. My customers didn't complain. I would bring those cars in, I would wipe them down, I would put on my music in my studio, and I would do my thing, and I really enjoyed it. So I think that's something where if you went in there and you started asking questions based on knowledge, on the pre-owned inventory, how many units are you moving a month? That's a big question. If they're going to tell you, say, mine were between 70 and 100. If you could start penciling out those numbers in your head on what's your overhead going to be, what's your cost on either, if you're taking DSLR photos. Matterport is what sold it for me for the virtual tour. That was the online presence that they found so appealing. I knew what my cost was going to be for my monthly subscription-based payment to Matterport. I was able to kind of figure those numbers in. I'm in oil country, so big shop space is very expensive. I was paying about $2,000 a month just for the unit that I was renting for the studio that I was renting. Yeah. So I had kind of an idea of what I needed to clear my bills and take care of my home bills and all of that. And I was able to make that work. I guess you kind of need to know how many units that they have. Know in the back of your mind that there's going to be a $3,000 to $4,000 markup minimum per used vehicle. So they're going to take in a trade at 28. They're going to put it on the lot at 32. Mm-hmm. That that they've got that margin in there to pay that. And you know, your biggest thing is that you're going to turn that inventory quicker, which is a huge deal because of that floating loan, that interest that they're not paying on that vehicle.
Yeah, well, that's very true. Look, that's great insider knowledge that you'd only learn from working with a dealership and being able to sit in on those meetings and really kind of working with someone closely. And in terms of the pricing, obviously it was something that was, if a dealership is going to give you 100 vehicles a month, like that's a substantial amount for any dealership to be paying on marketing costs. It obviously made sense to them at that price. So if it made sense to them at that price, you're going to be happy because they'll continue to do it at the end of the day. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as well. You don't want to always be kind of stuck in a price negotiation. You want it at a price that they don't have to think about it. They know the value they're getting. They see it as worth it, and it's going to put to the side. And then it's just about how much inventory actually comes in and goes out on a month-to-month basis.
Yep. And if you offer the turnkey service, if you take all of the price points of loading those photos onto the website, if all they have to do is text you that the vehicle's ready, and the next day the photo's going to be on the website, they're going to love you. Because oftentimes, you're dealing with salesmen, especially where I'm at, they may not be technologically savvy. So they're taking these photos, and then they have to figure out how to take these photos off of their iPhone, upload them onto the website, get everything in the order that they need to be. Well, these are people that are not getting paid for that. They're only getting paid if they sell a vehicle.
Yeah.
So they're not putting a bunch of time into it. They're griping about it. They're not, so if you're able to turnkey, and it was really simple, I was able to take those snapshots off of Matterport, have them loaded on the website. It'd take me about 15 minutes is all per unit. So I was into that vehicle for an hour. That hour was paying me $150. That's pretty good money anywhere you're at.
Yeah.
And it was absolute painless for them. They didn't have to do anything anymore. It was a done deal. One stop shop.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, look, Chris, thanks very much for all the information today. For everybody actually tune in on this, commenting, and tune in to watch the video, thanks very much. So what Chris actually provides some training and some consultancy around these services. I actually was going through, Chris has a bit of it's actually very, very cool and very innovative and very fitting, I suppose, to the industry we're in, is that Chris has designed to say how he sets up his scanning, his lighting, the way he actually goes through the entire process. It includes, say, his workshop setup from start to finish, and it can actually be viewed in VR, the training. So if anybody has any questions, wants to reach out to Chris about that, just get in touch with him after, and we'll put some details on this page. And with that, Chris, you also offer some consultancy and some ways to help people actually, I suppose, win their first dealer client. Is that correct?
Correct. I do. Yep. If you're going in and you have any questions prior to meeting with the dealer, lots of times you're going to go in and you're not going to have an opportunity to meet with the owner or the sales or the general manager yet. You're going to get pushed to the sales manager. He's not going to be the decision maker. The GM or the owner is going to be the decision maker. They just filter that through the sales manager. So you're going to go in, you maybe give your pitch, talk them into letting you scan one vehicle or take some, or how, for me, it would be to scan one vehicle, give them a demonstration. If you can get any feel for, what are their pain points, what questions did they throw at you that you didn't have answers to, that's where I can come in and I can give you a heads up, because I've gone through a lot of those exchanges. I know what they're looking for. I know what their numbers are. I can help you answer some of those questions so that when you do sit in front of the decision maker, you're going to have the knowledge that you need to have to get that contract going.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, just people watching, like, I'm not getting any cut out of this. I just went through Chris's training. This stuff interests me. I love this industry. I love kind of the stuff that's based around this. And really, what I suppose I firmly believe more than anything else is that I know myself when I was starting out in this industry, or even when I was a couple of years into this industry and I was trying to enter into new markets, was that if I went into a meeting and I didn't know what I was on about, or I didn't have some sort of information that you can't get unless you've actually done some of this work or had the experience, you're potentially going to rule out a massive client. If you went into it, you were looking in a way that, I suppose, you were talking to a company that had, I suppose, was very good to you in a way, in that they kind of work through this process with you. It was a new process to them, but every company is not going to be like that. Every company, you might only have one 10-minute meeting, and you either know what you're on about, you impress them, or you don't. They could be the biggest client you ever had. And you could potentially rule them out if you don't know that information. So it's very cheap. But if anybody wants to find out more from Chris after, as I said, like, you can contact them directly. It's nothing to do with me. So also as well, for people on this chat, we're actually doing another chat with Chris in our pro members group tomorrow. So if anybody else wants to, that is, I suppose, very, very interested in what Chris has to offer, just get on to me after that. I will include you in that second chat tomorrow. So thanks very much to everybody for joining, and thanks, Chris. It was very informative. And yeah, I'll chat to you tomorrow again.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
See you later. Thanks, Chris.
All right. Bye.